sampling designs and sampling procedures. When you think of sampling, and this is kind of a gross example, I apologize, but think of if, and hopefully this never happens to you, you ever have a biopsy of something. Let's say you got a growth on your forehead. They need to take the whole growth off to analyze what it is, to get an idea what you're dealing with. No, they take a sample, a representative sample, in order to determine the consistency within limits, statistical limits, mathematical limits. It's a representative sample of the whole. So so the sampling design, sampling procedures is really that. It's the mechanics of determining samples, what to sample, where to sample, when to sample, how much to sample, and so on. And there are always limiting factors. So here are the outcomes, which you can read for yourself, which I would hope you do. So why sample? So pragmatic. You don't need to touch you don't need to survey everybody in the United States to get an idea, plus or minus. There's always an error factor, what the population is thinking. Now, there are some with more error possibility than others. That's why a representative sample, a probability sample, is the desired outcome, the most desirable, but not always necessary and not always possible. So we want accuracy. Again, decision making goes back. We're talking market analysis or market research. We're not talking political research necessarily, but it's still the same procedures. Finding these things out is expensive and time consuming. Here are the stages of a sample. Practical concepts. Define the target population. When we think from a marketing perspective in your project, we're thinking target market, or who's the current target market, who's the desired target market, or maybe we're just trying to figure out from the group of customers that we currently have, the pool, that would be the entire population, what are the characteristics of the target market. And again, B2B is different than B2C. But that's where your thinking and analytical skills as an MBA student should come into play. So sampling units, primary, secondary, tertiary, they all have their place. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on each one of these. That's for you to read. Random sampling error. A sampling error or a probability sample means that anybody in the population has an equal chance of being selected. That's not always possible. Okay, systematic, non-sampling, and so on. Probability versus non-probability. A non-probability sample, which is what you'll probably use in your project, is not a death sentence to the usability of it, but it's something you still want to recognize. That's the key. You're aware and you recognize it and you account for it in the written document. So convenience sampling, here's where the non-probability, this is where we get kind of a feel for what's going on, the reality of things. So convenience, judgment, executive judgment, things like that, quota sampling, and so on. Sources, possible places of bias, non-probability, similar to the interviewer, easily found, willingness to be interviewed, middle class. Now, it doesn't matter if you've got a probability sample if they aren't willing to talk to you. So there's some real practical reasons for some of these things. But it's something you want to account for. So snowballing, probability sample, simple, systematic, and stratified. Again, it goes through a lot of math. Here's is a disproportional sampling, hypothetical example. So if your target market or your market surveys are going to be made up of warehouse clubs, chain stores, and small independents, and these are the ratios, your sample, proportional sample, should reflect those. If it's out of balance or out of ratio, then you might have a bias toward warehousing clubs because you're sampling them more than the other ones outside of the proportion that they are of the total. So again, think about it. This doesn't need to be overly complex, but it needs to be thought through. So methods, full enumeration, Kish method, who has the last birthday, so representative samples, there's just different ways to do it. So what's the appropriate design? Well, how much accuracy do we need? We don't need necessarily absolute accuracy to 5 zeros. resources involved. Time is probably the biggest thing for you in your project right now. So that's to be considered. Knowledge of the population, and is it local or national? How much of this are we going to cover? So that should give you at least a running start to this as you go through and work on this chapter. Take care.